It is hard to put into words the roller coaster of feelings that Mario Kart World has created for me over the last 90 days or so. There is just no way for me to express my thoughts on this game in any meaningful way in just a couple of minutes. It has made me feel like a bad YouTuber. This game was of course one of the most anticipated topics I've ever had on this channel, and it is something I've speculated about since 2014 technically, and yet, now that it's here, I have just not been doing my job as a content creator. I will say though, one of the biggest perks of being employed in the standard way is that in situations like these, I really don't have to rush out a video. I don't have to force myself to have strong but ultimately meaningless takes once every week. I'm just allowed to sit and think sometimes. And that's great in situations where I've constantly asked myself the question, do I truly love this game? So to start off, let me make something clear. I've found Mario Kart World pretty frustrating in a lot of ways. Whether it comes down to the character select UI, the character unlock system's missed potential of the open world, the inability to do P-switches online with friends, or of course, the inability to play traditional tracks and worldwide races whenever you want, there are a lot of design choices that aren't really excusable in my opinion. These are not the things I will be talking about today, however, and it's because I am simply not a normal type of karter. These are not the kind of things that I ultimately judge the game's quality and staying power over. This is not because these things don't matter to me, it is just that these things are ultimately not super relevant to how I personally experience these games. Of course, this has made it even harder to express my thoughts, because a large portion of my very much cherished subscriber base simply interacts with the game differently than I do. Many people might watch my gameplay and simply groan that I'm using the baby blooper cart, or question why I'm not more outspoken about the injustice of the character roster. But I am about transparency here, and the truth of the matter is that these things just do not matter a ton to me. I do not like what the Worldwide Intermission Track update stood for, and I think it was clearly the wrong decision. I am not afraid to speak up about that, and even see it as my duty to in some ways, since I do have a platform that reaches many other Mario Kart players. But I wasn't lying in the last episode that I talked about it when I said that I am not the most impacted party by the change. What leaves me mostly unaffected is the fact that I've always been more of a competitive player. I've always preferred closed competitions where point tallies are tracked as opposed to engaging with the more open-ended and more relaxed worldwide VR system. Careful observers of this channel have probably noticed this whenever the race results screens have come up in my videos over the years. Grand Prix point-styled systems are almost always seen as opposed to VR in my videos. And as many of you know, I was very disillusioned with the new point system. And of course, I made a topic about it pre-release that's still relevant today for 24-player lobbies. But with the private lobby system that I usually play in, we can pick whatever tracks we want, with an exact amount of players that won't break the point system and provide good matches. For now, at least. So initially, I was frustrated with this game. I did not really enjoy the chaos of 24-player matches all that much in general, but it was for other reasons. Even with the ability to still play, quote, traditional Mario Kart, with 12 racers on standard 3-lap tracks, it still wasn't fully resonating with me to start. This is because the control just felt worse. I felt like the ability to adjust with drifts was entirely gone, and this was something that I wasn't just used to in Mario Kart 8, but in 7, Wii, and DS as well. Simply steering is now the best way to get out of trouble in a lot of circumstances, but steering isn't always enough. Being able to adjust your line with a counter hop or drift was always appreciated in prior entries, and the idea that soft drifting and snaking were still problems in 8 Deluxe was not one that I agreed with at all. The item changes were not all that great either. I despised what they did with the boomerang and felt like its ability to become the pocket item after being used as the primary actually made it distinct back in 8 Deluxe. Now, being unable to chain it made it feel as if it was an item that both the user and target hated to see in play, and I found myself actively looking for explosions or places to otherwise break it on my first throw whenever I had it initially. And even months later, I still can't say that that isn't the case. Everything about this item just kind of feels like a net negative for the game. I found the changes with banana and bomb throwing to be disappointing too. In Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, the banana felt like not just a skillful item to use, but a practical one as well. It was a great weapon for taking out first place that required precision, but in World, their arc just goes so high that it practically cannot be seen anymore. I imagine that it is still skillful to land hits with, but it just doesn't feel very practical to get them. In 3 months, I can only remember really 2 instances of me deliberately going for a hit with them, at least throwing it forward. One here in Flom Desert, and no, I will not be calling it the other name, where I was already at a significantly lower elevation than my target, and here on Great Question Block Ruins, where in an attempt to keep my teammate in first after the upcoming shortcut, I practically dove down below the track to get the correct angle to land a hit on second who had a mushroom. I don't think it should have to be this hard, especially when considering that banana snipes were one of the things that actually set great players apart from the good ones back in 8 Deluxe. But I suppose throwing bananas would just be less risky now, and potentially seen as spammable since there are less single reds usually in play to punish, stupid attempts. While bananas can still be a weapon when thrown backwards, this is not really the case for bombs. And maybe that's not a terrible thing since they were completely overpowered in Deluxe in this way, but given that they're no longer a factor in first place typically and still have the same issues when being thrown forward as bananas, I just don't know if this nerf was all that necessary. I opt to almost use the item defensively now, and I feel like that kind of takes away from the unique item properties and use cases that these bombs had before, even outside of the patented 8 Deluxe brain-dead first place bomb back. Overall, I can't say I like most of the new items either. The coin block and coin shell once again do not care if you have 20 coins already, and their additions often either feel meaningless or are just outright annoying. And look, I don't necessarily hate them. I have self-awareness that the game has to be balanced in some ways, and you can't just automatically pull a useful item in mid-pack every time. And of course, with how there's 20 coins now, they need there to be more coins just in general. It's just, when it comes to the satisfaction of using said items, I don't feel that these are very high up on my list of preferred pulls. I also don't think that Kamek is the worst idea ever, but it is hard to look past it as just an impulsive character unlocking method that often just kind of feels RNG dependent. Kamek also travels relatively slowly, to the point where target Kamecking rarely feels timeable, and sometimes just rolling Nabbit with it results in certain death, whereas getting something else might allow you to escape. And when it comes to items that kind of have this kind of property, I think I much prefer Mario Kart Wii's PAL block item, which kind of acted as an item reset tool as opposed to just setting up an obstacle course. Of course, there's been a lot of discourse about bouncing off of people's heads too, and it has been mind-numbing to me. I don't think that many people realize that, especially online, bouncing off of another racer is not something that is typically controllable or even predictable, and I've seen a lot of confused people suggesting that someone complaining about this feature actually input the trick when it's entirely automatic. And of course, we're kind of in the same boat regarding item trailing too. Now, I've seen many cases where someone's shell has been destroyed on one player's perspective, but not on the actual holder's perspective. I'm not sure if this has been changed, or if I've simply just adapted in more recent months, but I do recall circumstances where I've been backed by a green shell that I literally could not see. The one battle I played online also I lost because the game was literally telling me that I had the lead when that wasn't the case, and I think it's related to how item hits work in this game. Of course, sometimes you can rationalize that an item is likely still there even if it isn't appearing, but I still don't think that this is really defensible. Of course, I've seen people try to defend it, because there's nothing random Twitter users like doing more than confidently misunderstanding a valid critique of a game and blaming the player for it. At the very least, I still prefer how item trailing works in this game over 8 Deluxe, because getting hit in that game because someone hit you on their screen was infuriating, and I much prefer the new system where you at least are able to dodge it on your own screen. 8D trailing did feel like a bit of a noob crutch because you had the ability to put stronger players who were capable of outlining you in complete hell. The thing is though, I don't think World's approach has to have different problems still. A much less offensive route in my opinion is that if someone still has an item on their screen, it should still be displayed everywhere, and the game should update that way. Of course, it would just be cool too if hits just always registered properly, and I still don't understand why auto-trailing has to be a thing to begin with either. I've heard that some players like it, especially some of the more casual-oriented players that enjoy this game. Personally though, it drives me insane. I don't like the implications with having less options in general. I don't like the idea that I will lose my shell necessarily when I get hit by a blue shell just because I happen to pull it as the first item in a double. And at the very least, I don't understand why we can't really have a toggle on this. Kind of like with tour and chaining items automatically. But yeah, the launch of this game was overwhelming in some ways. I had a rough go at things early on. I felt, and actually still kind of feel, that they give you less control of your card in this game than in 8 Deluxe, which is pretty weird because I feel like pretty consistently up to this point, every game has been an improvement over the last when it comes to kart control. Namely, early on, I felt that this was perhaps even detrimental to the game's enjoyability. But despite these mixed feelings, I didn't want to overreact or make a video that I knew would age horribly, because I've been in this spot before. I remember the early months of 8 Deluxe and remember having similar thoughts about it when it came out. Not necessarily about kart control, but other things. I remembered the heavily simplified driving taking place on the exact same track roster, coming off of the fast and energetic 8U era. I remembered a terrible item system where multiple piranha plants could be in play at once, with barely any invincibility frames there to stop the two of them from repeatedly chomping each other over and over again. And going back even further, I remember kind of disliking Mario Kart Wii at launch too, for taking so much of the driving tech out of the series. This was something I talked about earlier this year, and it was something I certainly remembered after struggling a bit with World at first. I know deep down that every game has a learning curve, and it is only after you get through it where I feel like a game can properly be judged. And this is why I just couldn't upload the last few months. I refused to write this game off, and I had no interest in making one of those cheeky Nintendo game video essays with the large "it's bad" text on the thumbnail. Because part of my identity here is being a guy who has played the entire series and takes pride in being good at all the titles. If I genuinely wasn't going to like Mario Kart World, it was always going to take a couple hundred hours and plenty of competitive matches for me to truly find out. Because while 8D had many game-saving patches in my opinion, it is true that after I got used to the game, many of my early game woes dissipated as I started to better understand things, and that takes time. So up until recently, I felt that while my issues with MK World were very real, that I didn't want to just give up. Doing that would actually make me no different than the people who trashed 8 Deluxe, 8, 7, or even Wii in the past, and I didn't want to contribute to what feels like an inevitable, toxic cycle of bad faith arguments that exist ultimately just to prop up whatever games people grew up with. And besides, it's not like it was all bad. There were a lot of really cool things I liked, and just getting to experience a new game in the series for the first time in a decade was awesome. But once I finally hit about 250 hours of playtime, and yeah, I know that's a lot to some of you, I finally felt like things were starting to click. I started to feel like I could compete with anybody, but the realization that I did in fact like Mario Kart World was not the main takeaway I had, nor did it really come as a surprise to me. This has always kind of been my path with new games in the series. I had just kind of forgotten since it's been so long since the last one. But what I actually discovered is that I think I just realized that Mario Kart players in general don't actually like change as much as they think they do. It is hard work to break a new game in. It is easier to initially notice what a game like this isn't as opposed to what it is. And largely this is why I haven't really been able to post new videos about this game, because I felt like I was still figuring it out. I didn't want to post opinions that I felt I didn't have time to fully develop, as my opinions have changed rapidly every few days. Many tracks that I thought I wouldn't like, I ended up liking. Just 1 week ago, I wasn't really a fan of Mario Bros. Circuit, and yet here I am today kind of developing a soft spot for it. There were even some that I thought I would like more that I ended up not liking very much. So in summary, how am I supposed to tell you what I find to be peak in month 1 exactly? So for the rest of this video, I want to talk about what made me finally change perspective, and what made me truly learn to love this game. And I think above all else, it starts with fixing many of the flaws that I simply just learned to accept with Mario Kart 8 Deluxe that I willingly overlooked for a few years just because I still liked the overall package. Now, I enjoyed the driving in Deluxe. It felt like a game that could make any track satisfying to play, but likewise, it was a game that could almost turn any track into a sandbagger's paradise. Some tracks were truly more resistant to this than others, like Wii Rainbow Road, which was littered with boost panels and half-pipes everywhere, but these tracks were outnumbered not just in overall tally, but in how often players tended to pick these courses in the solo queue. And my playstyle did not mesh with this setting that Deluxe constantly provided. There was just next to no benefit in running it up on dry desert. For me, I naturally want to win from the front. It typically feels more satisfying to win this way because it often does come down to speed differences or just directly outplaying some of your opponents. But weirdly, I found it more satisfying to lose this way too. I've always hated the feeling of a plan going wrong in the back and having to consider if I was able to take a different approach that I would have had more fun winning with. When the plan goes wrong up front, it usually leads to a bad result when there are competent bagging players. But if a plan goes wrong in the back, nobody even has to pass you, you're already just last. I often just sit there and question why I'm even playing, but again, that's just me. Many people liked this meta, and many people discussed the complexities of how bagging worked and enjoyed that. From my perspective though, there are far better strategy games out there if you want to play for this purpose. I play Mario Kart for the speed and enjoy the strategy elements and interactivity it has going for it on top of all of that. So the balance that we did get in 8 Deluxe was just not one that I particularly vibed with. I still used the meta characters and vehicles in matches, but I did stop interacting with the meta strategy often. I just did not enjoy the bagging aspect of the game. The object, of course, is to finish with a high placement, and I think it's unhealthy for a game if the ultimate goal is not something you want to strive for large portions of the match. This heavily complicates the concept of advantage and disadvantage states to strive for, and often reduces the game to feeling purely RNG dependent at times. And this is a big reason why I was much more focused on playing in teams in Deluxe, because that format did incentivize playing up front in mostly every scenario still. For a long time, I felt like I was deliberately holding myself back on Deluxe, but this was not something I really wanted to vocalize because flatly, it just sounds like an excuse. I accepted that I was not putting in the effort that would yield better lounge results because I did not see that effort as worth it, but it's not like things were always this way. It was just, I had played Deluxe for 8 years and Mario Kart 8 as a whole for even longer. Not only had I actually put the hours in before coming to any conclusions about the game, but I had some periods of success following periods where I did genuinely try to improve. But with Mario Kart World now out, things were different. To me, not putting in the effort would have been a complete disservice to myself because I didn't actually know my full thoughts yet. And before I continue, I should clarify, I've always liked Mario Kart World. It's not like I've been forcing myself to play it. I could always enjoy what it brought to the series on a casual level, and I've even had a great time with its single-player content. This was purely about finding out if I like the game's mechanics enough to really chase down the goal of becoming a genuinely great player. But obviously, you all know based on the video title that I've confirmed that giving up on the game would have been a disservice. And this is because what I found out is that the game meshes with me and my playstyle pretty well, and in many ways that 8 Deluxe did not. I've seen many people complaining about the item system thus far. At least in 12-player lobbies, I think I actually adore it. Red shells can no longer be reliably pulled in second place for starters. The dreaded double red in 8 Deluxe was such a massive part of AT's gameplay loop, to the point where it actively felt that the game was harmful to frontrunners beyond just the blue shell, which already had that facet of the game covered more than well. This was such a deal breaker to me that even if shock dodging wasn't overpowered in that game, I probably still would have been heavily partial to 6 vs 6, just on the basis that second place would sometimes be protecting you. If an opponent had 2nd through 4th in a 6v6, it was of course still bad for you, but at least that was a result of the opponent just being in better position. In standard free-for-alls, the only safety you could ever truly get was 2nd place being checked by 3rd, and of course, your typical player has no concept of spacing anyway, often making this a moot point in early tournament rounds, local tournaments, and notoriously, the community-dreaded NA Open. It's like the team behind 8 Deluxe perfected their item system and then during testing, realized they made first place way too weak compared to previous games, and their solution was to just allow first place to sometimes pull bombs. And to me, the range bombs had in 8 Deluxe were not a problem that needed fixing. The issue was entirely that they were often just a free win item for players in first. You never had to make a play with them really or take a risk, because if you got one, you were in a position of great power and that wasn't always particularly deserved. Needless to say, I think there were better ways to balance the spots up front, and I think that they learned their lessons here. It wasn't just a reduction in the rate of red shells that got us here either. Races will often just not have blue shells now, and the item system as a whole has made shock dodging less of a threat too, just because you're not really going to have races where the entire room dodges. Of course, first place is not an auto win in this game, and it never has been or will be in Mario Kart, but it is a position of extreme value again, and I think that matters so much. Holding onto mushrooms in first is less vital in this game as a result of it all, something that was pretty much a requirement in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe if you ever got your hands on one. First place is a position that is just worth getting to at all costs now, even if it requires you to use your resources to get there, as opposed to only being a position you wanted to be in if you were ready for the worst. Of course, it also makes more sense to strategize this way since boos are now pulled much higher up in the pack, so holding mushrooms over using them to expand your lead might not always be the play to begin with. Some might consider this to be a negative, especially the AD players out there, but perhaps surprisingly, I think I love how they implemented boos into this game. 8D boos in some ways were similar to boomerangs in this game. This was because as an item you could receive in the back, it was rarely ever your best option, and you were often just hoping that you would steal an item that you could already roll in your position to begin with the worst case scenario being that you just stole something from someone in the front. This made it so that boos were often not an item you wanted to receive because you would rather just get a star. And on top of this all, it was definitely an item that your target hated to see too, much like my complaints of the boomerang. In World though, getting a boo is kinda like rolling the jackpot. It is the absolute best item you can pull in its spot, and debatably it's the best you can pull in the game to begin with. And this is also because, like in Mario Kart DS, you have no reduction in speed even when you drive off-road with one. This may sound incredibly imbalanced, but very subtly they achieved many good things and fixed many errors they made with the 8D boo, on top of it just being a desirable pull now. First, the items you're likely to steal aren't actually that broken, or race-ending for the player you steal from, and if they are, it's likely that it was stolen because a play was actually made by the user for once. Like, when I have a boo in this game, I am constantly monitoring the other items in play in front of me, and actively looking to pull the trigger when my mushroom or triple shroom odds are maximized. Often I can even race my way up into second to get a guaranteed steal if the item in first is something that I want in particular. This is actually relatively calculable now since they are pulled higher up in general, whereas in 8D it was simply just a game of roulette where you could get anything ranging from a shock all the way down to a coin. Some other good news too is that if you successfully smuggled a Mega Mushroom or Bullet Bill up front somehow too, those items actually can't be stolen. But perhaps more importantly, boos being obtainable in higher spots and often being a tool that can turn races into plus 15s entirely transforms the risk and reward of how you position yourself in this game to begin with. Again, let's take a look at 8D. Nobody ever volunteered to play in the pack, despite the fact that it often gave players incredible pockets of space to work with, and this is because the risk and reward was simply not there. All it was really good for was pack spam everywhere and lost coins, with next to zero upside of winning races. Mario Kart Wii had a kind of interesting approach to the potential pack item spam issue by introducing the Thundercloud, an item that could actively harm you and ruin your race. It incentivized you to hold your items instead of constantly cycling for more pack items, which is probably why casual players remember more blue shells in this game than a lot of competitive players seem to claim there are. But of course, this was not exactly a satisfying conclusion because the Thundercloud was again kind of a race-ending item. Having an item like the boo now obtainable high up actually gives players a legitimate incentive to consider playing in what are traditionally the riskiest spots to be in a race. It helps to build a race distribution that is more reasonably spread out, creating more overall space for mostly everybody to work with. And given that the game also doesn't hand out 9 stars per item set just because a lot of people want to be far behind now, it makes sense that people wouldn't want to all crowd the back anymore either. Because when everyone sets at an item set, everyone involved loses out because of it. And the winner of that exchange is, well, the people who are front running, and that's awesome. So now that there's not just 10 people 5 miles behind on any track that has any off-road ever, it seems like, when shocks are used, no longer are you expecting to go from 1st to 11th. Instead, you might lose a couple of spots, but the true losers are the people who are in the back and were unable to dodge, and there will be plenty mostly every time now. What you have in this game is a game where advantage state and disadvantage state actually match your ultimate goals and make sense. Mario Kart World understands that bagging is a vital component for competitive Mario Kart, but it is something you should do sparingly because it is a much less comfortable position than it was back in 8 Deluxe. And of course, based on what I said about 8 Deluxe and my lounge experience in that game, this is quite the welcome change for me. I've realized that in many ways, Mario Kart World is a direct validation of my complaints about the late Mario Kart 8 Deluxe meta that I constantly found myself disgruntled with. I have something tangible to point to now, mainly that there are just results to actually back up any claims that I was underachieving on Deluxe. I feel like I can more credibly say that I wasn't good at Deluxe because I didn't really care to put in the effort, rather than that just being my maximized potential that many people may have thought was attached to me. And for many years, I did question if I was just washed, but I always felt that in the back of my head, I truly did feel like it was kind of just the game that I didn't really want to play. I felt that I probably was faster than the majority of the players I found in my lounge tiers. It just felt like the game did not frequently reward my efforts, outside of the few outlier tracks that just kind of worked. In World, though, I've paired up against some of the players that frequently beat me in Deluxe, and even many that were ranked firmly higher than me in that game, and I can suddenly beat them now with relative consistency. My time trialing efforts feel rewarded now, and I can often just beat players purely by outrunning them. and it has been an empowering experience after the last few years. This has also made playing in squad queues especially alleviating, because whenever I do end up playing with lower ranked teammates, I have felt that I can relatively consistently be rewarded for any speed advantages I have over the lobby, as opposed to only sometimes. The races I've been sharing in the background have been a great example of this actually. My first few races in this room were not very good, but starting on race 4 something kinda just clicked, and from then on out it was top 2 finishes only. These races were all consecutive, not just highlights from multiple matches. Being able to score like 130 points in 9 races just felt like something that was not possible for me in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Matter of fact, it feels practically unthinkable. I was much more likely to just randomly score in the bottom half of the room than I was to shred it, even if I was one of the highest rated players in the lobby. It's made me consider that squad queue in this game is probably imbalanced and perhaps manipulatable in some ways. I have a theory that playing with a partner around your MMR range is actually a pretty big disadvantage in these queues, and this is because not only do I think it is easier to chain first place than it is to chain last place, but because first gains more on second than 11th place does on 12th. Having one of the fastest players in the room as such that can chain first can perhaps override all other factors involved. But perhaps this also relies on none of your opponents rolling with the same strategy themselves and having another player contest you more up front. I guess what I'm saying is, whatever 2v2 team has the best player in the lobby is very likely to be the team that comes out on top, even when the MMR is distributed relatively evenly. Now, I am not inherently good at Mario Kart World, and I think the month of June proved that to me, and if I were to just stop learning strategies today, or reiterating good habits, I would definitely fall behind like I did in Deluxe. But the thing that makes me hopeful in this game is that even if that happens, it'll still always be worth it to try to catch back up. This game has demonstrated to me that there is tangible and consistent benefits to being fast that are not often undermined by the game's item system and players who make their livings off of manipulating it. I believe that no matter what level I end up being at, that I'll still be able to win in the way that is most satisfying to me against the players that I should beat. And that alone is part of what has sold me on the experience this game has to offer. Because even back on 8D, had I truly just embraced bagging, I'm not sure if it would have even benefited me in these squad queue rooms. To force yourself to bag against players that you can beat by driving is to lose your advantage. It's not that I never popped off in 8D when playing against weaker opponents, it is just that it never felt consistent. None of the wins, whether they were my own or the ones done by rival teams, felt all that sustainable, and many of the losses just felt like heists. It is not that I just wish to slander Mario Kart 8 Deluxe because of this all though. Obviously I had a lot of enjoyment with it, otherwise I would have quit playing entirely. It is just a game that simply required a different skill set, perhaps more patience, or unique formats such as Clan Wars to artificially build more consistency in the results. The players that I'm able to beat now that I struggled to beat before absolutely were better than me at Deluxe and deserve their higher ranks. I didn't put in the effort required to beat them, and I know that and have known that for a while now. So despite recent impressions, I'm not ready to say that Mario Kart World is a better game. I think that's something I will only truly understand after years' time. But what I do know is Mario Kart World is new, and Mario Kart World is a game that simply just better suits my skill set and playstyle. It is the one that I have vastly preferred playing in 2025, and I have every reason in the world to love it for what it is, and to focus on that in the near future. So that's going to be precisely what I do, whether or not any other 8 Deluxe players follow suit. With that said, I hope they do, because the more the merrier. What I perhaps did not expect going into this game though, was that it would feel and play a lot more like Mario Kart Wii to me than Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. I think this is one of the funniest dynamics to me, because I feel like competitive Wii players certainly feel it too, yet the more casual Wii fans seem to be almost clueless about this, but how it plays is uncanny in some ways. Not just because of a heavier emphasis on big shortcuts, but really in everything. Falling off removes your items again, the respawn boost is back, there's no more selection of cart parts, and the item system, while influenced by distance occasionally, has been much more toned back toward the traditional position-based system. Players can no longer pull stars essentially at will, and the rate that you get dodge items is kind of more like it is in Wii. And the dodge items that you do get aren't always easily chainable too. The Shock 2 operates much more similarly to Wii, which I would say is a bad thing if it weren't for the seemingly equal odds of it being pulled in last place versus second to last. This alone has been the change that I've kind of wanted to have in Wii for decades at this point, because it deletes the incentive to sandbag for the Shock, and turns the 6 vs 6 meta more into a system revolving around player pivoting, and I feel like this forces all players to be a bit more well-rounded and to be good communicators, and I value that in a team game. I know some games in sports have positions, but I don't think that Mario Kart needs to be one of those games. I think it can be positionless. And of course, with the changes to dodge item frequency, the ability to carry momentum throughout a shock sometimes, and just the relatively shortened shock effect length, it doesn't feel as damaging to runners in AD, or dare I say MKWii as well, given how much slower bullet bills and stars are in this game. And while many Wii players actually liked the item system where the shock had higher odds of being obtained than last because it tested a new backwards driving skill set for how players would fight to get it, I think that perhaps what we got in both Wii and World are best for their respective games. I understand the Wii players' arguments, especially when considering how powerful items like the bullet bill were already in Wii, but in World, my initial impression is that the shock is relatively weak compared to these past games, and that's not to say that it's straight up weak, of course, just that its frequency and nerfed impact on frontrunners is not over-centralizing enough for us to really want to have dedicated baggers to begin with. Maybe that will change with time, but right now, that's not the vibe I get when I play. I think a pivoting bagger system just makes much more sense for this game anyway, though, and that's even before considering that lap-down bagging would easily be confused as trolling, which Nintendo has made efforts to disconnect people over dating back to Mario Kart 7 now. I think the second I saw that double item boxes were returning, I thought it would be more like 8 Deluxe, so of course this whole it plays kinda like MKWii thing caught me as a surprise. It also works so much better than I was expecting it to, and I was pleased that they didn't do anything crazy like allowing item swapping to return again like in Double Dash. I know that this is a very popular request by casual karters, and it could easily be an impulsive decision they could make at any time that could just break the item system in half and make it feel nearly unplayable. I don't want to cover the possibilities of this now, but if enough people are curious as to why, I can maybe make a video on it at a later date. With this said though, I think I'm going to worry just a little bit less about them ruining an item system in the future again in a way like this, because I feel like there were a lot of little changes they made in this game that I would describe as crafty fixes that deserve more appreciation than they're going to get, because I think item balance changes are often so subtle that it's going to go over most players' heads. The truth is, though, everyone is always going to call a Mario Kart item system bad no matter what, because it will come to get them at some point in time, but truthfully, I think they did an excellent job here. There are much better criticisms to make about this game than this one, in my opinion. So yeah, I find the game similar in playstyle to Mario Kart Wii, but what is perhaps a little surprising to me was finding out that my tastes might align more with the Wii players than the AD players this entire time, despite me often being a champion of AD defense against Mario Kart Wii propaganda for almost a decade now. And to be clear, I don't take any of it back, because this is not some switching of sides. The truth is, I just was never on anyone's team to begin with. I'm just a guy who likes playing new games, and I had my time playing Mario Kart Wii long before even most competitive Wii players touched that game. And now I've had my time playing 8 Deluxe too. Perhaps I always have preferred the playstyle of Wii, but that playstyle alone wasn't going to take me back to the team's meta I actively disliked on one of my least favorite track rosters in the entire series, when I absolutely adored AD Wars, its track roster, and its driving. I only wish that driving and all of my underplayed favorites in that game were utilized more than they were. Luckily with World though, I am loving the track list, the new tech, and the free-for-all playstyle. Perhaps it's a bit jarring for you to hear that I am aligned with many of the Wii players over AD players after the last few years, but you all have got to understand that I've never been a true Mario Kart Wii hater, and quite the opposite of that. I have only been tired of the community surrounding that game seemingly trashing the rest of the series that I love to lift that one entry up in particular. So if anything, what I should be consistent about is keeping that energy up for perhaps a new generation wanting to protect the game that they grew up with instead. And don't get me wrong, as a long-time Deluxe player, I do understand where some of their complaints come from, and I especially understand why AD Wars could very easily be missed in the long term. Getting to the front early on in AD Wars and maintaining it was often challenging. You weren't ever going to be pulling a first set boo that could do the work for you, and you certainly weren't ever rewarded with high probability item backs on rails or the luxury of being able to miss on occasion. It was an incredibly hard game to win a 1 vs 3 scenario on, even if you held first, which was a situation that I would describe as a disadvantage in that game. But being able to wall break reds and land your hits when the opportunities arose was really hard. You actually had to be wary of not just all the reds, but also accurately place bananas constantly from top shelf opponents right behind you. At higher level, it is entirely possible that as World ages, it will have less meaningful interactions that can only really be won by the elite of the elite, and perhaps feel a little bit more basic as a result of it all. Ironically, while anyone could often cook in the 8D lounge, there is a world where anyone can cook in first in Mario Kart World, while that wasn't really true in 8D. And it's why I actually wasn't even a big complainer about the coin box and first change that they made in a recent update to World. I actually think it's probably healthy that there's an item that could make first a little bit more vulnerable, that makes players rethink mindlessly spamming back items at second. And I'm glad that they were able to achieve a nerf without resorting to 8D's add more reds approach. Regardless of what you want to say about in-game 8D versus World Fury though, we are not at that point yet. We will not be there for a while too. So to me, the only way to find out is to play, and watch this game evolve. It has already surprised me in many ways just 90 days in, and 90 days in, we shouldn't be focused on the endgame. We should instead be focused on graduating out of noobdom, being excited that the game rewards you for doing so, and occasionally playing some races using Snowman on the Ribbit Rebster. So with all things considered, I firmly believe that it is still too early to know what this game's true competitive value is. If your take in July was just that it's bad and that 8 Deluxe or whatever game is better and stopped playing as such, I think you've probably done yourself a disservice. And frankly, I think how widespread this mindset has been in just a couple of months has been kind of disappointing. I've seen many 8D players spreading negativity about this game, calling it RNG dependent, oftentimes giving surface level justifications about the meta that feel less and less true the more I experience the game. And that's not to say that you can't make valid critiques of the game, of course, but what I kind of want to highlight is that we should consider if we're criticizing games through the lens of another game. For instance, lots of top 8D players simply just got used to being able to pretty effectively predict what items they would get at any distance, and this game is just different. Bringing the 8D mindset over is just not compatible with this new system, and that doesn't make the new system bad, it just means it's different. And this honestly just takes me back to the early days of Mario Kart 8 on both the Switch and Wii U, the very game that many of these same people loved. I remember seeing others trashing 8 Deluxe back in 2017, judging it based on its differences from Wii and even AU, and back then, the MK8 players that might actually be criticizing World now got it. They dealt with some old school players that never gave the game that they liked a new mindset either, or tried to understand its legitimate merits. And as mentioned, I loved 6 vs 6 back in that game, and think a lot of people actually missed out on perhaps my favorite competitive mode in MK history, that being 8D 6v6. But now, I kinda see 8 Deluxe players turning into the very group of people that once discredited their game too. And once again, there's a lot to love here too in my opinion that I've already talked about earlier with World. And that's without even commenting on the fact that I do think that the driving is quite rewarding, despite being harder to pick up than most other recent Mario Kart games. I was never on Team 8 Deluxe, because I was never committed to a side in this Mario Kart series alignment war. I was simply committed to my truth along the way, that all of these games often have value if you look for them. And I've had time to love Mario Kart Wii, as well as time to love 8 Deluxe. I would even say that 8D was one of my most cherished games ever, and I just hope that one day, I'm not looking back at it with the same bad taste in my mouth that I've had for Mario Kart Wii all these years, due to an insecure player base that cannot let people enjoy what they want to enjoy, without throwing a flawed comparison in your face every 2 seconds. I hate to break it to you all, but I am the played and grinded every game in the series guy if any exist, and it is my professional opinion that if you're looking for a melee of the Mario Kart series, you're not going to find one, because none of them outclass the rest of them in every, let alone most, conceivable ways. So my final takeaway, give World a genuine shot if you're able. Play it at your own pace, and try to enjoy it for what it is. Maybe it'll end up being your favorite, and maybe it won't. But there is no better time to play than right now, while the community is all playing and learning together at the same time. And if the last 11 years taught me anything, it's that these windows of time are rare, and they should be enjoyed while they last. And when I locked in and did just that, I certainly found a game that was different, but also something totally worth some love. This game is a more than worthy entry into a legendary franchise, and I can't wait to see where it takes us next.